For most of human history, the stability of society has rested on what people could do, their capacity to think, adapt, and labor within systems that relied on them. But a quieter transformation is underway, one in which the very traits that once made human beings indispensable are becoming sources of tension within increasingly automated environments. As specialized systems assume responsibility for production, coordination, and decision-making, a new question emerges. What happens when a society no longer needs human cognition for its output, yet still must contend with human behavior? The transformation begins with the maturation of highly specialized autonomous systems. These systems do not emulate broad human intelligence but instead surpass human workers task by task, domain by domain, until the entire productive economy no longer depends on general-purpose human cognition. What once made humans economically indispensable, their flexible, adaptive intelligence, becomes maladaptive within an architecture optimized for hyper-specialized automation. When all essential industries are run by systems that never fatigue, deviate, or coordinate imperfectly, human participation becomes a structural inefficiency. Broad ability workers are too slow, too inconsistent, and too costly to justify their involvement. The result is a paradoxical state of abundance and irrelevance. A world where production flourishes, yet human economic value evaporates. But economic irrelevance does not remove humans from the system, it only removes their positive function. Their negative potential remains. Humans still inhabit the physical and digital environments these autonomous systems rely on. They retain the capacity to interfere, disrupt, or destabilize even unintentionally. A society no longer dependent on human labor becomes increasingly dependent on human non-interference. This inversion marks the conceptual pivot. Human beings are needed not to contribute to the system, but to prevent damage to it. Yet the same factors that make humans uncompetitive within automated production, their opacity, emotional nuance, and interpretive complexity, make them difficult to supervise by the machines that run everything else. Automated oversight fails not because the systems are weak, but because human behavior cannot be reliably reduced to domain-specific signals without generating catastrophic misinterpretations. Thus emerges the rationale for reassigning human cognitive surplus to a new kind of labor, interpretive surveillance. In the proposed structure, each individual is assigned one person to monitor and one person who monitors them. This reciprocal oversight network gives humans a role in the maintenance of social stability. Instead of producing value, they interpret behavior. Instead of generating output, they police risk. Instead of contributing creatively, they intervene preventively. On the surface, this may appear stable. A vast, evenly distributed web of vigilance absorbs the entire population into a closed-loop interpretive labor economy, but the system's internal logic contains its own negation. The first structural cost is the suppression of expressive freedom. When oversight becomes universal and reciprocal, personal expression shifts from a domain of exploration to a domain of liability. The safest behavior is the most predictable one. Variation becomes suspect. Novelty becomes noise. Individuals learn quickly that the smallest trace of divergence can be read as risk. What fades first is not dissent but experimentation. What disappears next is not creativity, but spontaneity. Over time, the entire expressive bandwidth of society contracts. This contraction is not merely cultural, it has systemic consequences. Expression is the mechanism through which societies generate variation, new ideas, alternative perspectives, exploratory thought processes. When expression is chilled, the cognitive ecosystem begins to simplify. Without variation, adaptation slows. Without dissent, error correction weakens. Without unmonitored spaces for exploration, creativity atrophies. A society whose people spend their cognitive energy interpreting one another, rather than interpreting the world, becomes incapable of producing novelty. The entire structure becomes self-referential. It monitors itself exquisitely, but it no longer thinks. This is the hidden price of stability. A system that eliminates behavioral risk also eliminates cognitive evolution. A reciprocal surveillance network compresses behavior into conformity. Individuals internalize the expectations of their watchers and the pressures of watching others. Over time, the population converges toward a narrow band of socially acceptable patterns. This homogeneity may appear stable, but it is structurally fragile. Systems without diversity cannot respond to shocks. When all minds think similarly, all minds fail similarly. When innovation is suppressed, no reservoir of latent alternatives exists. Thus, the system's greatest strength, universal compliance, becomes its greatest weakness, the inability to adapt. The fabric of social life also undergoes degradation. Reciprocal surveillance erodes trust by making all relationships contingent on interpretive scrutiny. Communication becomes tactical, not expressive. Intimacy becomes risky. The act of sharing becomes indistinguishable from the act of betraying. A society that organizes itself around vigilance inevitably generates masking of motives, performative conformity, suppression of disagreement, and suspicion as the default perception. Such conditions hollow out genuine social connection. What remains are networks of mutual observation, rather than mutual understanding. Ironically, the very mechanisms designed to preserve order inhibit the system's ability to recognize its own deterioration. When individuals suppress novel thought, the system loses early warning signals, those faint indications of social pressure, structural failure, or emerging instability that only free expression can reveal. The society remains orderly until the moment it cannot be saved. The stability is real, but it lacks resilience. While we began as a thought experiment about a fully automated interpretive surveillance society, modern trends reveal this pattern not as a distant imaginative construction, but as the logical continuation of tools already embedded in the digital economy. The rapid expansion of the global content moderation industry, from $9.67 billion in 2023 to a projected $22.78 billion by 2030, is not simply a response to increased online activity, it is an economic signal. The modern world is reallocating human cognitive labor toward regulating expression rather than producing material value. Content moderation is the prototype of the system described. It is the first large-scale industry in which humans are not valued for their capacity to create, innovate, or manufacture, but for their ability to interpret, filter, and constrain the behavior of others. It represents the embryonic form of an interpretive labor class that exists purely to manage risk. The tasks are the same ones that the hypothetical surveillance society ultimately depends on: contextual judgment, detection of intent, mitigation of destabilizing behavior, and the maintenance of a stable information environment. This is the critical observation. Once the technical infrastructure for high-throughput behavioral oversight exists, its expansion into broader social domains becomes not only possible, but increasingly likely. The pressures driving this growth, automated content generation, adversarial communication environments, regulatory mandates, political polarization, and the fragility of large-scale digital systems, do not dissipate. They intensify. Each new wave of automated production increases the volume and volatility of digital expression, widening the gap between machine-generated output and machine-interpretable meaning. Into that widening gap, humans are inserted as stabilizers. Thus, the world we imagined, in which humans are retained not for their productive capacity but for their interpretive vigilance, is not a speculative endpoint. It is an emergent structure. The proliferation of moderation tools, the industrialization of interpretive labor, and the institutional normalization of behavior monitoring are all components of a system that is scaling outward and upward from the digital domain into the wider social sphere. The danger, then, is not the existence of oversight systems. It is the combination of two forces. First, building highly scalable technical architecture makes universal surveillance economically and logistically feasible. Second, technical advancements make it profitable for companies to devalue human creative expression and repurpose human potential to oversight roles. Together, these forces dramatically increase the likelihood that the mechanisms built today for content moderation will be repurposed tomorrow for societal stabilization, not through conspiracy or design, but through the ordinary logic of risk management in an automated world. And herein lies the central warning. The tools created to manage expression at scale do not remain confined to the platforms that birthed them. Once the infrastructure exists, machine-assisted detection, behavioral scoring pipelines, escalating content triage systems, adjudication queues, rapid response human reviewers, context analysis frameworks, it becomes part of the general technological substrate. When a society later confronts the instability produced by widespread automation and human economic displacement, these tools will stand ready for redeployment. In other words, the infrastructure precedes the rationale. The machinery for interpretive surveillance is being built now. The justification for its universal application may arrive later. The original thought experiment asked what a post-labor society might require. The revised analysis asks what our current trajectory is already enabling. The two converge uncomfortably. We are not forecasting an exotic future. We are describing a present whose technical foundations scale far beyond the domain for which they were designed, and whose pressures all point toward expansion. The challenge ahead is not simply preventing a dystopian system from emerging, but recognizing that the raw components of such a system are already being assembled, normalized, and economically entrenched. The same companies making massive investments in AI and data centers with no path to profitability will be the first to suggest mass surveillance at scale. The risk is not that a surveillance society might be invented, it already has been. The danger is being lulled into accepting it as necessary, quietly, incrementally, and with impeccable technical justification.